We are lightly calling this the State of the Autism Care Demonstration update. We know that a lot has happened in this last year and a half. There have been changes that have affected our families in a variety of ways, and the majority of them have not been good. So we are going to skip the first part of this update that you see on the screen in front of you, because we know you know what the ACD is and you know what ABA therapy is. But it's on here because this update is also uploaded on our website, and we will share this with anybody that asks. The first thing that we want to tell you about is the third-party analysis of ACD's measurement of the efficacy of ABA therapy. Are you in a point where you can talk, Jennifer, or do you want us to pause on this and skip to the next one? Is Tucker doing okay?
Give me a few minutes, sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to skip the first one because Jennifer is definitely the subject matter expert in it, and we'll go to the next one, which is fraud concerns in the ACD. So what we're hearing from legislators in DHA is that the changes that have been made to the ACD, some of them were because there were such large number of claims that were fraudulent against the ACD. And so this is the second highest amount of money or expenditures that DHA is paying for fraudulent claims. It is just under the compound pharmacy benefit. And if you do a Google search of either the compound pharmacy benefit or autism and DHA, you will see many, many court cases where people are being convicted of frauding the government, forced to pay back the money, and going to jail. Unfortunately, this has had really negative outcomes for our families. And DHA is saying, we had to do this because we had to contain the cost because so much fraud was happening. And these are really around the whole community setting. I think that it has the potential to have been educational as well, but we're hearing it the most around the community setting, that families were having providers in their home and their child was napping and the providers were billing for that time. And if you are a family and that happens to you, because it's happened to a lot of families, that is actually fraud. You just don't know it because nobody has ever explained that to you. And there are a lot of other instances where fraud has occurred. And obviously we don't blame families. You can't know what fraud is if nobody tells you. So one of the things that we are asking is for DHA, and if they need the support of Congress to fund it, to create a campaign to educate our families on what fraud is and give them an easy place to report fraud. And we also take the stand that families should not be punished by the behavior of providers. And we're not saying all providers are bad. Obviously, there are amazing providers out there, but there are providers going to jail for frauding the government. And it's those providers that likely would have been caught earlier if families knew what to look for when they were talking about fraud. And so that's where we are on the provider fraud allegations. We do have links in our document that you can find on our website that can explain more in depth kind of the concerns behind fraud. And like I said, a quick Google search will give you a lot of information as well. I find that sometimes the Google search is easier to understand than some of the really heavy documents that come out of DHA. So I really do encourage that. I'm going to skip the next piece where we let Jennifer have her little guy sort things out in the background. And I will go on to the parent stress assessments. So at Exceptional Families of the Military, we have heard from you guys that the parent stress assessments have been a horrible addition to the requirements for your child to receive care. We are aware how invasive they are. We are aware that videos are on the internet that show some of those really invasive questions that are significantly worse, I believe personally, for parents of teenagers, where they're asking about your sex life, because I don't think any parent should be required to answer those types of questions in order to get treatment for their children. And so we have been working with legislative offices this year on the NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act. And that act is what provides funding to the military for everything we get, including our pay. So the NDAA is how you get your pay raise, and it's also how TRICARE gets funded. And we have shared a lot of your concerns, your stories that you shared with us, with legislators. A lot of them are just as repulsed as you are. And the shock on some of these people's faces when they see the questions that are being asked, it's unreal. I want you to know that they do understand, that they are completely there with you, and that they have told us that they are working together to attempt to get a bipartisan effort to repeal the requirement of the parent stress indexes in the 2022 NDAA. That being said, it's not a promise, right? They can go to the floor, it can get scrapped, but we are really, really hopeful that since this won't cost the government any money, it can be an easy change that could at least give us a little bit of relief. I've talked a lot. I am so sorry. So I'm going to keep going because it sounds like Jennifer has a handful on her side tonight. So I will go back up to the NASEM study. So many of you know that the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine is going to do a study on the changes that were done to the ACD. This was a hard-fought and lovely win for EFM last year. Together, obviously, with other families, we were able to, I wouldn't say come up with the idea of the NASEM study because that was created by a legislator, but we supported her request for the study, and we shared that desire on our part for families to be able to have this study at least do something, because we couldn't get a whole lot put in last year. So the NASEM study is going to happen. It is not on time. It has been significantly delayed, and at this point, we do not have a start date for the study. We are concerned. We continue to mention this to legislators, and they share our concerns, but say that the delay is good, that DHA is providing additional evidence and things that they haven't even asked for. But along with the additional evidence and additional documentation comes additional work. So it is going to start to take them a little while longer to get through everything. Our stance at EFM is that it's imperative to have family stakeholders heard during the review. So DHA is going to share the things that they've learned through the Autism Care Demonstration, why they made these changes, and what their plan is, as we get to the end of the ACD. And so we have asked that family stakeholders that are publicly known, so not behind closed doors, that someone is able to say out loud, these families have come forward and we've talked with them, we've communicated with them, and they are families enrolled in the ACD. And it would honestly be ideal if we had families before the changes and families who joined after the changes, because their perspectives may be different. And one of the things that we are cautiously optimistic about is the fact that we're part of the TRICARE for Kids Coalition. And when we mentioned in the TRICARE for Kids Coalition the desire to be allowed to talk to NASEM, it sounded like the Senate Armed Service Committee and the House Armed Service Committee were open to that. So we believe that we will likely, fingers crossed, have a seat at the table for some of those conversations and be able to give you guys, our families, a voice and a seat at that table alongside us, so that these more broad concerns from all of our families can be heard. We do unfortunately have some bad news regarding the study. Because the study has to happen, because of the NDAA last year, it's now law, it's required to happen. We are being told that the changes that have been made to the ACD cannot be stopped. And that seems kind of contradictory, right, Austin? Why? You just said you were trying to get the parent stress indexes repealed, but now you're saying the changes can't be stopped. And what we're being told is that the study is supposed to provide our families an answer as to whether these changes were appropriate. And they can't tell you whether they're appropriate or not if they don't see them in action. And so that's why we're being told that none of the other things can be repealed or changed until after the study is over. So we aren't happy about it, but we understand the requirement. And I think I would encourage all of you to think about it from the perspective of, if we don't have this study, then we have no proof that these aren't good changes. This study at least has somebody from the outside looking in who's not emotionally involved, determining for us, yes, this was good, no, this wasn't, and kind of, I don't know, I guess creating a middle line between DHA and families on what our children need. So Jennifer, are you?
I'm just gonna, sorry, I'm in kind of a spot. It's a little, um, I am gonna say advise families to, if you are curious to try to keep track of when the study could possibly start, to go to NASM's website and you can sign up for emails, because when they're doing studies and stuff, they are they send out emails. If that makes, does that make sense? Like saying like, hey, we're starting this study, or we're starting, we have the results of this. And so I do, I mean, I get, I'll let me try talking again. I do advise families to go to NASM's website, sign up for their email alerts, and see if we can't start tracking if they are going to ask for family, for families to give input or something, because you just never know what's going to happen. So
No, that's a great point. And I think that if this goes well, they may be asked to do additional studies. So being on their email list and knowing what's potentially coming would be a really great idea. Do you want to drop back down to the core symptoms of autism? I feel like we saved the best for last unintentionally, or worst for last, whatever we want to call it. But I'm going to let Jennifer take this one because it is hard.
So one of the things that we have been really advocating and communicating with legislators and DoD leadership and the DHA, I don't know if you guys have been noticing that they have been talking about these core symptoms of autism and really stressing it, with the DSM-5 checklist and the core symptoms of autism. Point blank, that's not a thing. I don't really know how else to say that. So basically what they have done, if you're looking in the DSM-5, I'm trying to think of how to explain this, but like in the DSM-5, there are 5 criterions. It's A, B, C, D, and E. When you're looking to diagnose somebody with autism, and you look at all 5 of those criterions to diagnose somebody. And when you're diagnosing somebody, so we have these, and they basically have taken criterions A through C and compiled these core symptoms. And because of that, they've applied those to if you guys have noticed, like our ABA treatment plans, if your child participates in ABA, that's like where they have been restricting a lot of these ABA treatment plans too. And I have been bringing up with leadership and the DHA about how you can't do that. Because the way I describe it to people when I'm talking to them is like, if you have, just take like cancer or something, and you have 8 symptoms of cancer, it's like taking 4 core symptoms of cancer, and if you fall under these 4 core symptoms, then you qualify for treatment, and if you don't, then you're not going to get treatment, kind of thing. It doesn't mean you don't have cancer, you just don't qualify for treatment. So some of you guys might be seeing where the treatment plans have kind of have shifted because of that. And and if you look at criterions D and E, sorry, I'm kind of getting a little mixed up. I'm trying to listen to my kids in the background to make sure, because they're running up and down the hall. But with criterions D and E, this is where we really could have focused on in our kids' treatment plans, like the sensory, like the occupational skills, the speech skills, ADLs and stuff. And that's where it kind of fell out, was in criterions D and E, unfortunately, when we came up with these core symptoms, unfortunately. And so I've been really trying to educate leadership and the DHA, saying like, this is not a thing. I when I'm teaching psychology, like psychology instructor, like when I'm teaching psychology, I'm not teaching my students about the core symptoms of ASD. I'm teaching about the whole diagnosis. And so it's really limited, as you can see on our thing, it's really limiting providers to developing these treatment plans. And that's, to me, that's really difficult. And it might be pushing some kids out of ABA. And so it's very difficult. I really wish. So the reason that we included it on our, this update is to, sorry, Austin, like maybe just bring it to people's attention more.
So if I can, Jennifer, I think,
Sorry.
No, when you're like, I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room. That's Jennifer. And I'm trying to understand what she's telling me. And so I think what I'm hearing you say is that we have children who were getting services before who now may not qualify for services because their needs were in these last two criterions that are used to diagnose autism. And that's really a sad thing because for those children, that's where they need the most assistance. And when we talk about activities of daily living, I think that you've mentioned to me previously that toilet training is included in that. And it's things that we all take for granted, right? That we do by ourselves every day that now ABA providers cannot assist our children in learning unless they're part of a different portion of the treatment plan. Is that correct? Or am I missing?
Yeah. So it's, like my son has a hard time with transitions, and so they work on going to the bathroom like through transitions. And so it's like, so even though they're going to the bathroom, it's the transition, it's stopping maybe a really fun activity and being like, okay, like let's go over here, or a fun activity and like let's go over here. And a recent thing for my son is being told no or wait. And so we're really trying to work on that. So that was my understanding is how it's getting, they're using it like with transitions. And so it's a part of, with his treatment plan, but my son is level 3 and considered severe. And so a lot of his symptoms do fall under the core symptoms. My older son, however, a lot of his symptoms fall under, some of them fall under A through C, but a lot of them fell under D and E. So when he was in ABA, a lot of his stuff like sensory, social skills and stuff, it fell under D and E. And so his treatment plan, unfortunately, had a really hard time going through TRICARE, getting pushed through TRICARE. And so, but I don't know if that helps.
No, I think it does. And we talked about fraud earlier, and I want to say that the irony here that we understand DHA not wanting to pay for fraudulent claims. Totally agree with them there, because I'd much rather have that money for our pay raises. I'm going to be honest. But something to think about in this setting is if families cannot work with their child in ABA specifically on potty training as a goal, then they're more likely to need incontinence supplies covered for a longer amount of time because they don't have that reinforcement that they maybe otherwise would. And so I think that that's something to continue to converse with, right? Leaders and legislators and the DHA, and let them know, hey, how much does it cost to take this out? Like, how much are you saving versus how much are you paying for diapers? Because I've seen my daughter's bill for medical diapers, and I'm telling you guys, I looked at it today. It was over $1,600 for a month's supply of diapers. And these are good night pull-ups. So they're nothing fancy. You could buy them at Walmart, and I know they don't cost that much. So when you take into account, $1,600 this month for pull-ups, would working on potty training during ABA cost more than that? I think that would be, my question.
Yeah. And it's, it is one of my it is one of my parent training goals, obviously, so that we do work on. I have an app. I can't remember what it's called, but my son really likes it. And anytime he hears it, he gets kind of excited and he likes to press the buttons. And so I mean, we do have that. I love parent training, and I think it's very helpful for us. And so we have a great, wonderful provider, thankfully. And, we've had great providers in the past as well. And so um, I'm super thankful for that. It's just really hard to, having been a therapist and having like worked with TRICARE, myself, I was not an ABA therapist. I was a practicing LPC. But like, I can't imagine having TRICARE or the DHA or somebody sit here and say, like, you can only work with these specific symptoms of somebody with depression or anxiety or some other, like something that I have a very wide range of skills of working. If I would be like, oh, you can only work with, X, Y, and Z and depression, I'd be like, what? Like, excuse me, that's not how this works. And so it has to be, and after talking, to my son's BCBA and everything about it, I mean, the frustration has to be there. So, so I see the core symptoms as being problematic as a parent and a previously practicing provider, because it's like I said in that one article I did, it's like, I don't like, to me, this does not, it does like a check the box. Like, I don't know. I just forewarn, again, it just kind of seems like how is a treatment plan going to be tailored specifically for my child if we're limiting the scope for these poor providers?
So sort of like they have a generic form that everybody has to follow, and this is what ABA is supposed to be, but you're trying to say to them, my child is a unique individual, and his assistance that he needs and his goals in ABA can't be that generic, because he has, I think all of our children, I did not start with this, but I have multiple children on the spectrum. All of our children are different, and they have different strengths and different weaknesses. And so what works for Jennifer's child is not necessarily going to work for mine. And I think that that's kind of where some of this frustration comes, because we can't all use the same form, right? This can't be the same treatment plan for all of our children because our children are not the same person.
Yeah. And even whenever I was practicing, like, I mean, I had like a whole, I had like a list of like, okay, these are generic coping skills, that people could utilize. But, I would sit down with with all of my patients and be like, what works for you? Like, yeah, these are something that we can, a starting point, but what works for you? Maybe it's reading, like, let's kind of brainstorm, because every person's different. Every person's needs are different. Every family's needs are different. And so it's really important to make sure that, especially when it comes to, as in, to ASD, it's really important to tailor it to the individual, and what can the family do to work with their
to
family
work
member
towards their child meeting the goals that are appropriate for them, right?
Yeah. So
okay, so I think we've hit the bottom of our page. We have a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to read them out loud to Jennifer, and we'll answer you all together. You're not alone on this, Jennifer. So Tasha shares that she wishes they had sent something out saying if you were diagnosed prior to December 21 to get a renewal, you have to have the DSM-5 now. So what I think Tasha might be saying is, I shouldn't have had to have been double checked for the DSM-5 if my child was already diagnosed using the same document. So if I was diagnosed in 2020, before the changes in 2021 using the DSM-5, why do I have to do the DSM-5 checklist now? I think is what she's getting at. And you have a good point. We've heard that from a lot of people. The running joke in my family is that you cannot be cured of autism. So why do we have to keep saying you're autistic? because that doesn't change, because autism is based not only on the behaviors you have today, but the history of behaviors you've had in the past. So the diagnosis will always be there, no matter how good you look.
So I said it in a webinar today, actually, and I don't know if anybody else is out there and they can that watch this. You can correct me if I'm wrong or maybe answer it. But my understanding was that the reason we now have all of these lovely checklists and whatnot now is to not to go through reevaluations and everything. It is to check the progress or something was what I was picking up on. I'm sorry. I had my life, I think I had like, it was like I had that webinar, and then, my son's homebound right now. My other son's home, my oldest son's homebound. And so I was like, and then my students, I have a summer school class that I'm teaching. And so of course, like, I'm
and
like,
what she's not showing you is she was fielding our questions in yet another Zoom meeting while this Zoom meeting happened. But Jennifer, I think the good news for us is Dee Bosworth shared for us in our chat. Thank you, Dee. We talked
Dee,
about
were you on that webinar?
I'm
gonna sit here and be like, as if like Dee can sit here and answer me right away.
So Dee said, not to your question right now, Dee said during today's One Up TRICARE 101 webinar, Christiana Biania, clinical psychologist in medical affairs with DHA, stated that the attestation form's purpose was to streamline the process for providers, but it was a hassle for families. The webinar recording is on YouTube now, and she has linked that YouTube video in our comments. So please go watch it. And Dee also says, Jennifer, yes, she was on there with you.
Message me, Dee. I have an answer to one of your questions there.
Fun. Yes, so I'm trying to run us through. I didn't mean to cut you off, Jennifer.
No, you're fine. No, but like, yeah, it was like the purpose of it, like she said, was to mainstream and to, in their mind, it was to, so that way we can take the paperwork and everything, since we move every couple of years, that way we can show the next provider, here is what we've all been working on. Here is the progress and stuff that has been going on. But I don't know if you guys have been, what I've run into was that some providers haven't been filling out the DSM-5 checklist. They won't do it. They'll refer out, which causes wait lists. I mean, I know that it seems like, EFM has been kind of quiet on the advocacy front. And that's mainly because, like, if it has seemed that way, sorry, but like, we've been really busy on the other side. And but we're, there's several of us that are right in it with you all. Like, I think I told my pediatrician's nurse before he retired about the DSM-5 checklist, because I heard that he was referring people out. And I was like, no, this isn't happening. I was like, I will go up there and teach him how to fill this thing out. And next thing you know, I got a call from his nurse that was like, he said, he looked it over, he's fine, totally cool with it. And I was like, thank you. Yeah. So it's just a lot, but yeah.
And I will say that EFM has been hearing from providers at civilian clinics as well as MTFs. They are just as frustrated as you are, though sometimes their hands are tied, right? Because they're being paid for or employed by the very people who are in charge of these changes. So I guess my point here is you shouldn't feel alone. You're not the only person feeling frustrated with this new process. Providers are as well. So Dee asks, are you hearing about issues with the new definitive diagnosis referring provider attestation form required before referral to an ABA provider? And I feel like that's new to me, but honestly, I'm not deep down in the weeds every day. So maybe, is this something you think we could get back to her on, Jennifer?
Yeah, because I remember that she asked that question in the webinar today. And I want to say, if it's the form I'm thinking of, I want to say that the mainstreamed process, like all of it's just kind of yes. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that, like, when they added all of these when they made these changes in 2021, it just added a lot of paperwork for these providers. I talked to one developmental pediatrician. I've talked to one developmental pediatrician who told me, she was like, Jennifer, I have a long checklist now of what I have to go through for each kid. And it has added 20 to 30 minutes of paperwork that I didn't have before. And so yeah, it's just, I think the whole thing, I mean, we can look into that specific form, but I think the whole process in general has just frustrated a lot of people, because it's like, you can go to one provider here for this, you can go to another provider here for this. Oh, this specific form is due this year. Well, now it's due this year. And so I think everybody is just kind of
Overwhelmed.
Yeah, overwhelmed and just not really knowing where to turn. Like I mean, for me, I got a letter saying that one of my kids' testing was due, and we just did it last year. And I was like, that makes no sense, because we just did it last year.
Right.
So
That is frustrating. So I'm going to try to get us through comments. We have been on for a very long time now, over a half an hour. So I'm going to try to not take us past 8:45 if I can. I want everyone to know that if we don't answer your questions, I do see them all in the chat, and I promise we will circle back and get you answers if we don't get to them in the live feed. So Tasha just shared that her son was diagnosed in 2020 at 2 by a developmental pediatrician at Fort Belvoir, and that diagnosis no longer counts, and she has to take him to a licensed psychologist for a definitive diagnosis. So Tasha, we might be reaching out to you to hear how that goes, because it sounds like this might be a newer idea coming out of DHA. Dee then shared, thank you for including ADLs and the deficits that are directly related to the core symptoms of autism, which is mind-boggling that ABA can no longer address the challenges. And we agree with you, Dee. Dee also shares that it feels like it's a bait and switch, that TRICARE announced we did not have a confirming diagnosis, but the pediatrician is now required to complete this attestation form that came from another medical provider, and that they received a bill for office visits that were unpaid by TRICARE, in addition to getting to the struggle of getting the pediatrician to attest to the evaluation assessments he did not personally conduct or have knowledge of, which I feel like Jennifer's face told us all, yes, why would a provider say, yes, those things are all true if they weren't the ones completing the tests, right, Jennifer?
yeah, there's just so many forms.
Yes, there really are. So I'm going to keep going down.
Sorry, I'm just like,
no, I mean,
and I don't even know if I have in my head, I'm thinking of the I can't even say it. I can't even say the form. I can't even think of the form. Like, I'm trying to think, I'm running through my head right now. Like,
yes,
gosh.
maybe one of the things. So Holly Duncan, who co-leads our autism committee, is a fabulous internet sleuth. So maybe we can ask her if she can pull these forms and we can find a place to put them on our website so everybody can see all of the things that we're talking about. It's not going to happen tonight though, because PCS season, right? So
And IEP season, or for some people.
yes. So Sarah just shares she agrees they're limiting the scope of ABA. Tamika shares that she had to go to her case manager for the new definitive diagnosis forms at the PCM's office. And then more agreements with everything that's going on. Dee, you're amazing. Thank you for helping everybody in the chat. Cassandra shares with us that she had to teach her pediatrician how to fill out the forms. So that's absolutely crazy, but I'm glad you knew how to and you were able to teach them. So maybe Cassandra can give us all a lesson on how to fill out the forms so that we can teach our providers. We haven't had ABA for a year because of all this TRICARE mess. So Stacy, you are not alone in that, right, Jennifer? We're hearing from a number of families that are not able to access ABA right now. Do you want to elaborate on that any? You don't have to.
No, I would be interested if you're willing to email or reach out and see if there is any way that we can assist. Sometimes it's sometimes we're able to assist, like helping people. I'm trying to think. Sorry, one of my kids is running down the hallway.
Helping people navigate this process
Yeah.
and know what's missing. So when we talk about providers not always being sure, Jennifer knows every part of these packets that have to go up. And so she can be that person, and her team can be the person to help you figure out what's missing. Why are these referrals not being approved or going through, right, Jennifer?
Right, especially too, like we've even talked to some ABA providers that are like, if it's retirees, like maybe you live in a town that, or you're prime remote and you live in a town that takes TRICARE, but they're not in a military town. Like me, I'm in a military town, so it's like they all take TRICARE, and so they're very familiar with the changes. They know how to work. Like I'm very fortunate, my ABA company does very well with these changes. I probably just jinxed them. Sorry if anybody's just happens to be watching. Hopefully I didn't. But anyways, but you know, I've talked to ABA companies where they're like, what are these changes? What am I doing? What am I doing wrong? And it was like simply like they're missing the DSM-5 checklist. Here it is. Here's our, you know, here's the checklist. Here you go. Or they're missing this. This has to be done every year. This has to be done every 2 years. It's the PSI 4 or whatever. And so sometimes like it's little things like that that could be missing, or it could be like we've walked families through like, okay, you've tried this provider. What about calling this provider and seeing what about this? And I'm not saying it can be that easy. And then also too, sometimes it's just, I don't know about anybody else, but sometimes it's just like validating the struggles that we all are going through. And the frustrations. It's just being able to vent and have people understand. You know, because we've been there. Yeah, I mean, we've been there. Some families are really isolated right now. Because it's hard to go out and, you know, it's hard to, you know, go outside of the house because child has anxiety or something like that. And you know, family members might be deployed and all that. So sometimes it's just like reaching out saying like, hey, this is really hard, and having people to talk to and connect with. So
right. So I'm trying to Zoom. Jennifer's right. We do have a Facebook group specifically for our families who have a loved one on the autism spectrum. And we have been throwing around the idea of a coffee chat if you'd like to be talking with other families going through similar situations. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely post about it in the autism group, and I'm sure we can set something up. Holly, the co-chair with Jennifer on the autism committee and our policy person, because that is not her title and I can't remember what it is, told me that we have the DSM-5 checklist on EFM's website. I did drop a link to the autism page on the website, so I'm sure that the checklist is there. I'm scrolling. I'm apologize if you have a comment that I have missed. There are a lot of comments and they are stacking up. Stacy, we don't know why it has to be so hard, but we agree with you that it's very hard and we're all just as frustrated as you are. Dee shares that you're right, Dr. Jennifer. I don't know what you're right on, but go you. I love being right. Nadine says she's about
to get that notarized.
Your husband needs that, right?
Screenshot this. Yeah.
Yes.
Good shirt.
There was somebody who needed assistance. I dropped you. Oh, I'm glad you guys loved that. I dropped you our email. So if you need assistance, autismandexceptionalmilitaryfam.com. It is in there. And oh, it looks like we have friends chatting. I'm sorry, just give us another minute, everyone. There are a lot of comments and they just keep coming. So I am lagging on my side. So
and I don't have my Facebook up because I have raise your hand if you have ADHD and you get distracted too easily.
And I'm fully medicated and still am distracted. So, you know, I just go with it. So Nadine shares, I have one son in the program already and now one son just diagnosed. And between TRICARE and the ASN, I'm getting slammed with multiple calls daily and no one is on the same page. Holly knows what's been going on with their situation and I'm ready to say forget services because I shouldn't be this stressed out trying to get started with services for my son. And Nadine, we are hearing that from families who are trying to start services, as well as families who have been in ABA for a significant amount of time, that the battle has just become too much, that it is harder to fight through this than it is to get care. And we don't want that for our families. So I know that you're connected with Holly and she's helping you any way she can, but we are here to help in these small ways that we can. We cannot make Humana or HealthNet or DHA do things, but we can be here to support you. So maybe this coffee group would be a good idea after all. And I think, even though I can't see the clock on my computer, it is nearly 8:45. So we are going to wrap up. I think I've scrolled through the majority of the questions. And if I have missed yours because I scrolled wrong, I promise we're going to go back through them and answer them. But we really appreciate all of you joining us today. I feel really appreciative of you guys for sharing your time with us tonight. And I feel like this was probably not the best call in the world for you guys to tune in to Facebook Live and hear all of these things that aren't going right. But we want you to know that you're not alone. We want to put these in very simple forms so that families can understand them, because not all of us are doctors like Jennifer. And these things are really complicated. And the very last caveat is, although we are a nonprofit, we are obviously just military families with a loved one in EFMP. So if we misspoke on something and it was an accident, we apologize. I believe everything we've told you tonight is the truth. But when you are live, slip of the tongue, you call something one thing and it's really another word. I want to apologize if that happened. If anybody needs clarification on anything, we are obviously happy to help. But thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Jennifer. I know that your little one has been in a rough place just all over this week. And so thank you for taking the time away from him to chat with everybody. These updates are on our website. We dropped that link in the chat and we're going to share it off of our Facebook page now. Again, reach out to us if you need any assistance, autism@exceptionalmilitaryfam.com. Thank you.